Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner and the Apocalypse. Chapter 511. Xietain is serious as reincarnation? Xietain walked silently and with his heart heavy toward the big bath, under the guidance of one of the maids who worked in the villa. There were many of Bai Yong's relatives who had been slaughtered after they were found to have committed many crimes worthy of the death penalty, so the number of staff was quite low at the moment. "Sir, would you like to leave?" The maid looked as if she intended to offer some kind of service, but Xietain didn't even bother to let her finish speaking, and dismissed her. The beautiful lady's face turned slightly pale, and in fear of losing her life, she quickly bowed deeply before retreating without looking back as she carefully closed the wooden door. Xietain looked back and sighed as he removed the lower part of his now useless armor. "I really need to calm down a bit," he said as he jumped into the large pool of warm water in the center of the room. The records of so many lives that had been forcibly etched into his soul had taken somewhat of a toll on Xietain, and with his stone heart skill being so much weaker compared to what it was in the past, the effect this had had on him was not small. In fact, at this moment, even if a beautiful woman were to strip naked and sensually before him, Xietain would surely dismiss her without giving her a second glance, despite being a perfectly healthy young man. He stood with the treasure orb in his hand tightly clutched in his fist as he plunged deeply into the warm water and let all the dirt and impurities on his skin be carried away by the current. A few minutes passed, and during that time Xietain's world had become isolated from the outside world. The only sound he could hear was the sound of the cascading water being spat out by 4 lion statues located at the 4 corners of the large pool. After what seemed like an eternity, he emerged back to the surface, and as the drops of water ran down his handsome face, his eyes slowly opened. However, those 2 eyes as black as midnight had already regained their usual calm, and no complex emotions could be seen in them. The only thing that shone in his eyes was firmness. There was no time to waste. Xietain knew better than anyone that time was the most valuable thing there was, and a resource to be cherished to its fullest possible extent. Wasting time feeling regret, really, how pathetic. He shook his head as his indifferent voice echoed through the bathroom walls. "I wonder if Lilith would make fun of me if she were here." Xietain thought aloud as he sat on the edge of the pool and looked at the glowing orb he held in his fist. "Cyan-colored orb, legend-grade treasure," Xietain said in a cheerful voice. This was undoubtedly an extremely juicy reward, and he could not wait for what fate had in store for him. Therefore, he broke the orb without a second thought, just like his childhood times when he would tear like crazy the gift papers he received on his birthday to see the contents of each wrapper. Bang! A bang similar to a crystal glass shattering after falling to the floor, followed by a bright flash of cyan light, broke the nature of the room, and Xietain was forced to close his eyes momentarily as the cyan light spread everywhere. Even before Xietain opened his eyes, just based on the feeling transmitted from his hand, he had already identified precisely what kind of object he had received. Now it only remained to check the nature of that object. Outer space, solar system, just outside the Earth's atmosphere. After things calmed down, Lilith still continued being the spotlight, while everyone seemed to ignore Fire Sorrow. "Bloody Succubus, can you explain how you arrive here?" Valiant frowned slightly and asked in a serious voice. Lilith looked at her and then looked at Lucifer before saying casually, "The reason I joined the demonic army is because I appreciate the personality of our leader Lucifer. The only reason I didn't look for another faction to join is because the demonic army doesn't have as much pressure on its members as long as they follow the basic rules. How I got to this place so fast is one of my biggest secrets, and I don't think we have enough trust to share it all." Lucifer looked at Lilith with indifferent eyes, waiting for her next words. He somehow already saw coming what would happen anyway. "Therefore, if you guys want to force me to talk, I'm afraid you leave me no choice but to change sides." Lilith didn't wait for a response from anyone, and ignored the looks of shock on the faces of each of the members of the demonic army. She looked at Meads and said coldly, "I heard that the army of heaven possesses a magical array capable of removing certain artificial records and recording others. Is that true?" The Lord of Heaven's eyes sparkled as he heard Lilith's words. Meads nodded without hesitation and said in a soft voice, "Indeed, that is true." Lilith nodded calmly and looked at Lucifer without another word. Although Lilith said nothing more, it was clear what she meant to convey with her previous words. If Lucifer or any other member of the demonic army continued asking her private questions, then Lilith would leave the faction immediately and join the army of heaven. "Bloody Succubus, you?" Valiant glared at Lilith angrily and clutched both of her blades as she said in a righteous voice, "How can you say such words just because of a petty question? Does the demonic army mean so few things to you?" Lilith looked at Valiant coldly and said indifferently, Valiant, to you the demonic army may mean your home. But to me, it is nothing more than a means to an end. I just joined you all about a decade ago, and you expect me to have that feeling of belonging that you all feel here? Don't be so naive, please. We are all adults over here. For you, this might be an insignificant question, but for me, it is one of my biggest secrets. Do you want me to share my life-saving method with existences I barely know? Why don't you better ask me to cut my head off right here? Valiant's expression froze as she understood the meaning behind Lilith's words. In fact, to Lilith, the demonic army was just a means to an end. After all, she needed a faction to become a higher existence. However, if Valiant or anyone else assumed that Lilith saw them as a family just because they were part of the same group, then they were all terribly misguided. Although Valiant found many excuses to retort to Lilith's words, it would go against her personality. Valiant was a considerably upright woman, so after realizing that what Lilith said made sense and did not lack logic, she simply took a step back, even though she still did not agree with the path Lilith was taking. All the higher existences of the demonic army looked at Lucifer. From the 5th Order to the 7th Order, they all waited the final response from the Supreme Leader. Even the members of the Army of Heaven were waiting for Lucifer's words. After all, if Lilith deserted the demonic army and joined them, the Army of Heaven would be gaining a powerful 6th Order angel who had reached such a stage in just a century. This meant that it was highly likely that she would also be able to ascend to the 7th Order within a few millennia more. Lucifer sighed in his heart and looked at Lilith with complicated eyes as he slowly said, You are a really smart woman, bloody succubus. Lilith looked him in the eyes fearlessly and didn't respond to Lucifer's apparent praise that didn't really sound like one. Forget it, it's true that there is no such rule in our faction as revealing each of our secrets. Lucifer waved his hand at the void, making his final decision. After all, who didn't have secrets? It was impossible not to have them. Even less so in a faction like the demonic army, where even among members sometimes battles to the death arose over petty disputes. Revealing all the trump cards in a world like this was no different from digging your own grave. This was true even for the higher existences, as they too were constantly fighting their own wars. Lilith nodded indifferently and silently cancelled the ongoing activation of her second firmament fragment completely. Both Lucifer and Medes, as well as all the 7th Order existences present, thought they heard a sigh of regret coming from somewhere. However, none of them sensed anything strange, so they soon forgot about it. Just then, Fire Sorrow approached with crestfallen eyes that were clearly brimming with sadness, as she carried the Emperor of the Asura race along with her. Michael had a disdainful expression on his face, and although he didn't say a word, it was more than clear what he meant. Lucifer sighed and floated gently towards Fire Sorrow. She stopped in front of him and after a long time said softly, I can't find it. Of course you can't find it. Lucifer sighed again and gently patted Fire Sorrow's shoulder as he slowly said, Back then, we witnessed with our own eyes how Sirius destroyed his birth world. How can something that was destroyed so many years ago continue to exist? Surely that lower existence over there was confused on the name, or perhaps that lower existence called Xietain was simply spouting off bullshit. Fire Sorrow bit her lower lip as she held the ancient necklace in her hand and squeezed it tightly. She really wasn't willing to accept reality even though it was right in front of her eyes, less so now that so many things were happening at the same time. I really hope that the person called Xietain was the reincarnation of Sirius. Lucifer smiled bitterly and shook his head without commenting on it. On one side was the constellation left behind by the Heavenly Wolf before he left. That distant constellation that had been silent for countless eons showed movement twice in less than 2 decades of time. On the other hand, there was the lower existence Xietain that seemed to possess a soul capable of withstanding the pressure that the universal law of gravity imposed on it. Coincidence or not, Sirius also had gravitational magic engraved in his soul and was one of the few able to learn it without suffering backlash. Moreover, with the firmament fragment of the Goddess of Rebirth appearing in Longtion's possession, Fire Sorrow could not help but feel hope for the imminent return of an existence capable of turning around all the evil that was happening in the universe without anyone knowing about it, except for the higher existences. However, she also began to realize that such things were just that, coincidences. It was not possible for someone who had destroyed her world to be reborn, no matter what, since that was the law of the universe, and even those who had overcome all the laws of this universe could not break this one law. Lilith frowned slightly as her heart jumped in alarm. Reincarnation of Sirius? Xietain was? No, such a thing was not possible. Unless what that person said to him before was a lie, Xietain was definitely destined to be much brighter than the Heavenly Wolf. However, there was something else that left her in shock, and as she looked at Lucifer with wide eyes she subconsciously asked, What did you say? You saw with your own eyes how the heavenly wolf destroyed his world. How is that even possible? Lucifer gave her a sidelong glance and held nothing back as he shrugged his shoulders and said lazily, Of course it's possible. This senior here has lived so long I don't even remember my correct age or anything like that. Sirius was also my friend before he ascended. As the members of the demonic army looked at Lucifer in shock, he looked at Meads and pointed out, That old geezer too. He may look handsome and all, but he's actually so old that no extra wrinkle could go into his body. The corner of Mead's mouth twitched several times as he looked at Lucifer, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. Lucifer, you. Meads was not angry with Lucifer's revelation. After all, when one joined a faction one could not give information detrimental to that faction to another faction of higher existences. Therefore, Meads did not have to worry about some black-winged angel appearing within his flock. It was also precisely because of this that Lucifer did not bother to hide anything, and instead tried to find reactions on Lilith's face, since in his eyes she was tremendously suspicious. To begin with, he never tried to hide this information, it was just that there was no need to shout it from the rooftops. Except for a few, all the angels looked at God with surprise and admiration. The very thought that their lord had actually been friends with a legendary existence like the heavenly wolf filled them with pride and at the same time giving them more confidence about what was to come. Helsker stepped forward and shouted excitedly, Leader, the world Sirius was born on was called Earth? Is that why Fire Sorrow reacted like that after hearing that name? Yep, not just Sirius, I was born there too. Lucifer nodded coolly and then noisily said, Back then, Earth was pure water, and there was barely a patch of land. So, that fella decided it would be very clever to call that world planet Earth in ridicule. The name spread far and wide and up to the time of its destruction, that's what it was called, Planet Earth. Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner and the Apocalypse. Chapter 512 The Curse of Eternal Life. The atmosphere in outer space calmed down quite a bit after everyone explored the area for several hours. Lucifer and Meads forbade spreading the information to other factions of higher existences about them being extremely ancient beings who had seen the beginnings of the beginning. As for the explanation they gave in this regard, it was very simple, especially Lucifer's. Wouldn't it be a pain in the ass to have a lot of random folks suddenly show up at your door, pretending they want to sell you a high-end product, to see if they can steal something from your drawers? Basically, everyone would start trying to steal the treasures of the army of heaven and the demonic army, and with good reason. After all, with Meads and Lucifer being the only two higher existences leading a few other existences across the universe, it wasn't at all crazy to assume that both of them had collected countless natural treasures over the years, that they were alone and without the company of a third faction. As for the explanation Meads gave to the army of heaven, naturally, it was more reasonable than Lucifer's. Our army of heaven is currently harmed after undergoing the war in the Crimson Rift. We need times of peace, not of war. Only in times of peace can glory return, as war will only serve to wipe out those who are weakened. All the angels understood perfectly well that while the army of heaven possessed an extremely firm foundation, so it was basically impossible to shake them, the fact that even beings like Sirius and others had died meant that anything was possible. Therefore, it didn't hurt to be a bit more cautious. Besides, it wasn't as if the higher existences of the army of heaven and the demonic army were getting something in return, nor some kind of reward for spreading the aforementioned information. They were beings who had lived long enough to put aside childish acts of wanting to show off to others, at least, most of them. Ha ha ha. I can't wait to track down that doom-roar bitch and tell him that. Boom. Just as Helsker was laughing nonchalantly in the middle of the emptiness, a giant black hand materialized out of nowhere and hit him with so much power that the 6-foot-plus giant was sent flying hundreds of meters before finally steadying himself. Before he could say anything, a lazy voice came into his ears. Little ape, calm your tits if you don't want to be locked in your cage. Cough, cough, of course, I was just kidding. Helsker coughed as he said under his breath and looked at Lucifer uncomfortably. TSK. Lucifer shook his head before looking away. The members of the demonic army looked at Helsker with helpless expressions on their faces. He was a nice man, the only major problems were that his temper could go from 0 to 100 in 0.1 second, and that he wasn't particularly intelligent, as he usually squashed anything he didn't understand or didn't like. However, everyone understood well that it was precisely that attitude that made Helsker into Helsker. After all, that was the path that the existence known as Helsker had been walking for as long as he could remember until now. Lucifer noticed that Fire Sorrow was in a low mood. It was practically sweeping the ground. However, regarding this, there was nothing he could do but sigh in his heart and hope that she would soon recover from this relapse. After all, regardless of how brilliant and powerful the title of being one of the strongest in the universe might sound, Lucifer could not turn back time or bring the dead back to life. Even the soul record, which was the true ruler of the universe, was not capable of such things, let alone Lucifer, who was just another piece on the great game board. The lord of the demonic army searched the surroundings among his ranks looking for someone in particular, until his eyes easily found the one he was looking for. Lucifer floated lazily towards a certain area where there were only a few people chatting quietly, and when these demons saw him pass by, they quickly moved out of the way as they looked at him with respect. It had to be said that the revelation as well as today's performance of this usually lazy and even embarrassing demon lord left every single member of the demon army very satisfied. All the higher existences present began to see Lucifer in a new light, and the members of the demonic army were especially pleased as they observed the stares of the angels of the army of heaven change from past mockery to respect, and even some fear as they looked at Lucifer now. Bloody succubus, it really is easy to find you even in a crowd of a few hundred of thousands. That is appreciated as it saves me a lot of trouble, and I also save large amounts of stamina, Lucifer said as he arrived in front of Lilith. Lilith was mixed among the various demons of the demonic army, but her beauty was simply too dazzling to go unnoticed regardless of the numbers. She was like a beautiful scarlet swan in the middle of a flock of white hens. It was just impossible not to look at her even if you didn't want to. She looked at Lucifer calmly and waited for his next words. Lucifer raised an eyebrow and said lazily, "You know, I think you're the first existence I've met that values her words more than I do, or maybe you're also secretly a lover of sleeping all the time. Could it be that you really want to save as much stamina as possible?" Even though Lilith tried her best, she didn't manage to completely control her expression, and after hearing Lucifer's comment, the corner of her mouth trembled slightly for a second before returning to normal. "Oh well, never mind." Lucifer waved his hand slowly as if suddenly a great wave of sleep had hit him. He yawned with narrowed eyes, and 2 large tears immediately appeared on his eyelids as he said in between his yawn, "Why what do you plan to do next, bloody succubus?" A puzzling glint flashed for a split second in Lilith's ruby-colored eyes before disappearing without a trace. Even Lucifer didn't notice it. "I guess I'll return with the rest to your Majesty's castle in Cram World, if your Majesty allows it," Lilith replied calmly. "Eh?" Lucifer suddenly froze, and as his arms stretched upward since he was distressing earlier, he looked at Lilith with eyes full of surprise, as if he had just heard something he didn't expect to hear. "Is something wrong?" Lilith looked at him as if she was really confused by Lucifer's sudden changing attitude. Inwardly, however, she scoffed at him. Lucifer was smart, of course, but Lilith was no fool. In fact, she was a really smart woman. Therefore, she managed to see through Lucifer easily this time, thanks to the fact that she had been quietly studying him all this time. "Something wrong?" "No." Lucifer scratched his head and muttered in a low voice that only he could hear, "Weird. I thought she'd leave right away, and there go my plans to follow her." In fact, Lucifer thought that Lilith was hiding something else, something different from what she was already hiding per se. Therefore, he planned to hide and follow her silently as Lucifer trusted heavily on his space magic to avoid being detected. However, Lilith's reply shook him completely and left him not knowing how to respond to her. "Bloody succubus, are you sure you want to come to Cram World?" Lucifer asked as if to make sure he wasn't missing something. "Of course," Lilith replied with a casual smile. Suddenly, she thought of something, and as she looked at Lucifer she asked curiously, "I've been thinking about it for a while, but, if your Majesty allows it, I'd like to ask you a question." Lucifer looked at her still surprised and subconsciously nodded. "Just ask then." Lilith frowned slightly and asked something that had been bothering her for quite a few years now. "If I'm not mistaken, the first time I introduced myself to your Majesty, I called out my name. However, at that time you never referred to me by that name, and simply looked for some other way to call me. Even now, you only call me by the alias the other demons gave me, but you never call me Lilith. May I ask if there is any particular reason?" It was just an insignificant question, but it had always been making Lilith uncomfortable for some mysterious reason. Regardless of whether it was Valiant, Fire Sorrow, Crow, Hellsker, or any other higher existence of the demonic army, they all referred to Lilith as Bloody Succubus Lilith or merely Lilith. But none of them referred to her only by the alias Bloody Succubus except Lucifer. So, now that the opportunity had lent itself, Lilith decided to take it and ask if it was just out of caprice and habit, or if there was another reason she was unaware of. The emerald eyes of Lucifer flashed weirdly as he looked at Lilith, and his lips curved slightly upward. "You know, I don't quite understand what you want, but I don't care either, since I'm sure you're not aiming to hurt me or my faction. But I always found it curious, and so far I can't understand the reason why you would choose the name Lilith out of so many possible ones." Lilith's little red mouth opened slightly as her eyes sparkled with surprise, and she looked at Lucifer without saying anything. Lucifer turned to leave, but just before leaving he turned to look over his shoulder at her and said lazily, "By the way, all leaders of higher existences have access to a window that allows us to see the name and origin of our members, as well as some other details, such as life status and current order of power." But for the first time in countless years, an existence which seems to have no origin showed up in front of me. "Don't you think that's interesting, Lilith?" Lucifer took one last look at her, and after seeing her eyes flinch for a moment he walked away satisfied as he said aloud, "All right, you bastards, we are going to the hell bloody shit. This father is getting better and better at cursing. I even do it without realizing it." As everyone looked at Lucifer speechless, Lilith was dazed for several seconds before chuckling and shaking her head. "A status window revealing personal information? Isn't that cheating?" she muttered to herself as she thought about how Xietain would react if he was in her place. That little scoundrel would definitely shout something like, "Hey, no one told me about this." He might even complain about the moderator's poor service for hiding vital information from the players. Lilith chuckled to herself as she imagined the scene as if it was happening right now. Since Lucifer knew she was hiding big things but he wasn't pushing her too hard, then Lilith didn't have to worry other than to be a little more cautious. But in fact, Lucifer was right. Lilith had no malicious intent. There would only be two people who would suffer a little here. She sighed and looked up at the stars hanging in the wide sky above her head. Lilith only hoped that her decision turned out to be the right one, because she was slowly beginning to change her mind about her final goal. "It's okay," she said to herself as she gave herself courage. "There are still a few more years to go." In the distance, Lucifer looked at Lilith and saw her gazing at the heavenly firmament towering over infinity. That beautiful sea of seemingly limitless stars that in reality conceal the truths of the universe, and despite its real darkness, attracted the gazes of all under its warm radiance. When one lives too long, the life becomes monotonous to the point where even the food you once loved gets insipid, Lucifer whispered to himself. When we reach that point, even if we know we are walking toward our own destruction, we will gladly take the dangerous path that will bring us the most emotional agitation. No one knew how terrifying eternal life was more than the higher existences. Countless had taken their own lives in the past. Non-paragon geniuses who once led a race and saved worlds decided to bestow eternal rest upon themselves because they were unable to find a reason for which to continue breathing. The passage of time might not be able to erode the fleshly body of those like Lucifer. However, time was undoubtedly the most terrifying law that existed, as it could not only give life, but also take it. One way or another, time was always victorious. Even the higher existences were not exempt from this fact. For even if they were physically safe, their aging souls began to search for simple things they could no longer reach. Family, friends, acquaintances, loved ones, etc. Lucifer had seen with his own eyes how they all perished while he continued moving forward. A few years ago, after several eras had passed, the feared and respected demon lord felt it was time to rest, but he could not seek eternal rest, as doing so would be irresponsible of him toward those who trusted him with their lives at stake. Therefore, Lucifer spent most of his time during the last 100,000 years sleeping. Out of sight, out of mind. This was a saying that expressed it perfectly well. With his eyes closed and his consciousness shut down, Lucifer could defer that desire for a longer period of time. Until a decade ago, someone who made Lucifer see a new path opening up before his eyes showed up. That path was being opened apparently by Lilith. As to whether that path would lead to salvation or destruction, Lucifer did not know. However, he did not care too much about this. After all, this universe will soon come to an end unless something big happens. Lucifer withdrew his gaze from Lilith and copied her as well, looking at the sky above his head. "Let's see what destiny has in store for us. Victory or defeat? Death or life? Destruction or creation? Annihilation or preservation? Be that as it may, this daddy here will definitely see the end result with his own eyes, and if something comes my way, then that something does not need to continue existing." Meads didn't say much, and after giving Lilith a glance as he now seemed interested in her, he simply took all the angels of the army of heaven with him. As for the demonic army, they didn't stay long in this area either. Lilith took one last look at the blue planet behind her before going into the portal and disappearing. However, she would be back very soon. A few more days just to distract them was all she needed. There were so many things she needed to tell Xietain and so many questions she wanted to ask him. Lilith felt anxious like a little girl despite her life experience. Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner and the Apocalypse. Chapter 513 What a Baby Can Provide to Daddy. Planet Earth, China. Inside the luxurious main bath of the villa that formerly belonged to Mayor Bai Yong, Xietain was sitting on the edge of the large pool of warm water, while looking at the object in his right hand with curious eyes. This object was small, circular in shape with a large hole in the center, and on the purple surface were several strange deep violet runes and lines that had been engraved with some unknown material. Another ring. Xietain muttered to himself. Well, considering this thing is legend grade, it should be good, no? He said to cheer himself up. Besides, Xietain still had room for more rings, so regardless of the function of this new ring, it was most likely of good use to him. Let's see what you're hiding there, baby, he whispered as if speaking to his lover as he stroked a finger across the surface of the object. The records of the ring immediately flashed in Xietan's retina. However, when he saw what it was, his expression froze. Spatial storage ring, legend-grade treasure. A ring that was crafted by a talented blacksmith over 12 million years ago. It was forged using a rank 4 metal, and an amateur magic rune inscriber found it by pure coincidence, then, without knowing what it was, used the ring to practice her rune skill on this ring, because of its good material. This ring is proof that sometimes miracles really can happen. Fight and persevere. When equipped, it automatically increases the following stats: magic plus 70, agility plus 50, mana plus 30. Inside the ring, you have a space equivalent to 10 x 10 cubic meters, where you can store any object that does not possess life. To be able to use the ring freely, you only need to let a drop of blood trickle on the surface. Xietain couldn't help but let out a small sound of surprise as he stared at the ring in his hands. Then, as if awakening from some sort of dream he was in, he jumped off the edge of the pool until he was standing with his completely naked body in the free air as his excited blood bubbled furiously. Xietain Bingshu, as well as all the main soul evolvers, was staying in the villa that previously belonged to Bai Yong. The villa was really big and would have no problem accommodating around 60 people, so there was no need for everyone to split up. After all, even though Baikwin Camp had fallen, there were still many things that needed to be done. The government of Xietain in this new place was far from stable, and the only way to speed things up a bit was to transport the citizens from the north to here. That way, when those who already knew what it was like to live within the administration of Xietain could plant seeds of good faith in the hearts of the survivors of Baikwin Camp. There were still many things that needed to be done, such as cleaning up some streets that were covered with human waste, because the previous government did not care about the base's slums, starting to distribute relief food with some mutant beast meat to slowly improve each survivor's body to eliminate possible diseases, forming a larger logistics team to add to the current one, getting to know the other leaders of the different forces, etc. However, Xietain Bingshu had taken this well-deserved rest, not to sleep even though she was exhausted, but to take care of Wu Yijin. Xietain Bingshu looked at the face of the unconscious Wu Yijin and sighed softly as she bent down to gently wipe with a damp towel the beads of sweat that slid silently down her lovely innocent face. From the moment Xietain was saved by the two women and forcibly pulled out of the gray corridor seconds before the Cosmos Gate collapsed completely, Wu Yijin had not opened her eyes again after she saw the miserable state in which he had returned. But it was also understandable considering that the Xietain from a few hours ago was alive basically thanks to his blood manipulation skill that prevented blood from continuing to flow out of his system, and thanks to his health stat comparable to a peak second-order human or a mid-level second-order feral beast. Girl, you really fell for that scoundrel, millimeters? Xietain Bingshu whispered under her breath. Who would have thought that the ever-jokey that smiled at everyone but never really cared about anyone Wu Yijin would actually end up falling madly in love for a man in a matter of a month or two? If Xietain Bingshu or anyone else still had any doubts about Wu Yijin's feelings for Xietain, then the fact that she had fainted directly after seeing her loved one in a state that looked like he would die in the next instant was probably the final proof to remove all doubt about it. Xietain Bingshu's eyes suddenly became complicated as she recalled what happened in Oblong World. However, she soon shook her head as she said to herself, "Forget it, he was just giving me the potion since I couldn't drink it, due to my badly wounded condition, no need to overthink it." He would have made it for anyone who found themselves in that kind of situation after that anyone protected him. However, even though she was trying to convince herself with those words and had indeed half succeeded, the other half of her could not accept them as true. After all, that was also my first kiss, you little bastard. Shang Yun Bingshu gritted her teeth and cursed under her breath. Ooh. Shang Yun Bingshu suddenly jumped off the edge of the bed where Wu Yijin was resting, when a yell that resembled the howl of a wolf in front of the full moon shook the entire mansion. She looked in the direction of the howl and gritted her teeth as she muttered, "That little bastard really needs to make a fuss about everything?" This wasn't nearly the first time Bai Zemin had yelled when something he didn't expect happened after all. Besides, it was clear that something good had happened to him, since his voice was brimming with happiness. So, she thought about going to check what was going on, but after a moment's thought, she decided it was better not to. Therefore, after snorting in the direction of Bai Zemin's howl, she sat back down while pouting and complaining hysterically. She only calmed down when the soul record began to calculate her achievements to offer her the deserved reward. "I finally got my fucking ring," Bai Zemin exclaimed joyfully as he raised the purple ring high in both hands and pivoted naked around the bathroom. Although Lilith had told him that there was some probability of obtaining a low-quality storage ring if he accomplished a really great feat, Bai Zemin had dismissed those words as an impossibility since the day he heard them. Little did Bai Zemin expect that he would actually obtain a legend-grade treasure, and that from the orb would actually come out a storage ring as he so desired. "How I really want to see Lilith's face when I show her all the good stuff I got recently." Bai Zemin laughed like a little demon as he rubbed the ring. Although in Lilith's eyes this kind of treasures might not be a big deal, she would probably be shocked when she found that he, a peak first-order existence, actually had such good quality stuff for his current level. After jumping naked all over the bathroom in a way that if anyone saw him they would probably faint from shock due to the stark contrast between this Bai Zemin and the usual Bai Zemin, he slowly calmed down and carefully placed the storage ring on one of the fingers of his right hand, just like the blazing ring and the arachnid silk ring. He bit lightly on the thumb of his left hand, and worried that one drop would not be enough, he ran the bloody finger across the surface of the storage ring, turning it red soon. Flash! A slight radiance immediately shot out from inside the ring, as the deep violet runes and lines lit up as if they had received some kind of stimulation. As the wound on his thumb disappeared within moments, Bai Zemin watched in wonder as all the red blood was gradually absorbed by the runes glowing on the storage ring before disappearing without a trace. He immediately felt as if something connected with his soul. It was a strange feeling, as it was not like the soul contract he somehow formed with the endless blue lotus flame, but felt freer and less heavy. "Oh, there really is a lot of storage space here," Bai Zemin exclaimed happily as his consciousness was immersed in a different space. The surroundings were dark with white mist surrounding a certain area the size of a fair-sized room. 10 x 10 cubic meters was undoubtedly more than enough to bring Bai Zemin great relief from now on. So, now, after playing for several minutes, allowing his consciousness to drift in and out of the inside of his storage ring to get used to the process faster, Bai Zemin made sure that there was really no one around, as if he feared that someone would see what he was about to do, even though earlier he was running wild with his little brother bouncing up and down without a care in the world. But in fact, this was an important matter, as even Bai Zemin himself had no idea what would happen next. He reached out his right hand and, as if he had done it millions of times, held it to his chest. Then, he whispered a mental command, and a bright golden light illuminated the area of his heart. Bai Zemin pulled outward, and along with his fist clenched in a grip moving away from his body, the golden light also followed the movement of his hand. By the time his arm had fully extended outward and the knuckles of his right hand were pointing toward the wall in front of him, the golden light in his hand stretched out similar to a laser beam until it reached 2.5 meters. The golden light receded, and in its place what appeared was a golden spear exquisitely decorated by a lot of runes. This was precisely the spear that had saved Bai Zemin's life. However, there were many noticeable differences compared to the spear he had seen several hours ago. Although the spear was still golden and good-looking, the crimson glow that surrounded it was nowhere to be seen. Furthermore, the runes were dulled as if they no longer had any power, or as if they had worn out over the years. Besides, I no longer feel that strange power I felt coming from the spear before. Bai Zemin whispered to no one in particular. Before getting to work, Bai Zemin had naturally picked up the spear. How could he leave behind a weapon capable of ending the life of a fourth-order being in an instant? However, to his surprise, the spear simply disappeared without a trace. Just as Xietain was scared to death, a lot of information naturally flowed into his soul, so that he immediately understood how to summon the spear again if he so wished. However, Xietain had not done so until now, since at that time he simply did not have the time and circumstances did not allow him to sit down and drink tea. Therefore, now that everything had been partially settled and the rest could be treated more lightly in comparison, Xietain decided to give it the attention this golden spear deserved. Well, even if it was weakened for some reason, it should still be strong, right? Xietain excitedly talked to the nothingness. Soul record, show me what this baby has for daddy. Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner and the Apocalypse. Chapter 514 Strange Phenomenon and Jealous? Annihilation of the Falling Sky. Current form. Spear. Rank. Soul armament. Physical attack power. 1000. Durability. Options. Option 1. It is currently lightly attached to Xieain's soul, but its true owner can call it back at will. Other than that, no one but those who have received approval from Annihilation of the Falling Sky may wield it. Option 2. Using mana, the user can change the form of Annihilation of the Falling Sky to any weapon desired, as long as the user has a clear idea of its composition and features. Description. A soul contract needs to be formed in order to reveal the true power of the weapon, and only then can the true Annihilation of the Falling Sky be seen. The requirements to form a soul contract with Annihilation of the Falling Sky are currently unknown. What the hell is this all about? Xietain looked at the empty space in front of him with his eyes wide in shock. He expected the golden spear to weaken, even though he didn't know the reason, since he could feel it that way. However, he definitely did not expect to see such a miserable status window as the one he was seeing right now. No growth by level? No gradual growth along with the user? Nothing? Xietain asked to the weapon in his hand as he shook it, as if he expected a human reply from it. Of course, there was no reply at all. Not even a strange glow, as was the case in many novels where the weapons tried to give signs, but then fell asleep due to their weakened state after some legendary war or something like that. There was no such thing. Although Annihilation of the Falling Sky was a powerful weapon, as 1000 attack points could not be underestimated at this stage of the apocalypse, it was actually far from enough for Xietain. If Annihilation of the Falling Sky had appeared in front of him before he forged his Crimson Thunder Dragon's last words, then things might be different. But now that he had tasted the terrifying power that a weapon with 10,000 physical attack could provide, Xietain could no longer turn back. Even the Gauntlet's Persuasion, Secret of Thunder that Xietain had forged as a secondary weapon, had not only 150 more physical attack points than the Golden Spear, but also provided him with the sum of 800 points of magic damage. Sure, having a weapon that was literally indestructible was a good thing, but what good was it if it was weaker than even your secondary weapon? Xietain really didn't know how to feel about that. He had expected the spear to be weakened, but not that much. Besides, what is a soul armament? Xietain looked at the spear as he rambled with a slight frown. Like everything strange related to soul record and evolution, a soul armament definitely has something to do with soul power. However, how do these things work? No, to begin with, how the hell do you get one? Although Annihilation of the Falling Sky seemed to be a weapon forged by a blacksmith, Xietain could by no means comprehend how it was possible to forge equipment capable of freely changing forms. Moreover, Annihilation of the Falling Sky did not even have a specific rank. Forget it, forget it. Xietain shook his head in determination not to think about it too much. He temporarily knew nothing about soul armaments, nor did he know the way he could unlock the actual power of the Golden Spear. However, at least, Xietain had received a treasure that would perhaps one day reveal its radiance to the entire world. Moreover, even though Xietain complained about the low attack power that Annihilation of the Falling Sky had compared to Crimson Thunder Dragon's last words, he was actually satisfied. After all, the attack power of his greatsword was simply bestial, so Xietain did not feel safe wielding it on Earth. With his current total power, if Xietain wielded such a powerful weapon, there was a possibility that Earth's spatial laws would not handle it. Even half a city comparable to a small country was destroyed by his fierce wings, and this happened on a world far more evolved than Earth. The least I wish for right now is more trouble. Xietain shook his head and was about to leave the bathroom when suddenly the double wooden door was opened with a bang. Xietain, you must see Th. Haijinji, who looked very rushed for some reason, didn't even listen to the maid behind her, trying to stop her as she explained the situation, and directly began to speak as she came in. However, her words immediately got stuck in her throat when she encountered a sight she definitely did not expect to see. Before returning to China to continue her studies, Kai Jinji had lived in Europe for 5 years. Therefore, she had seen European men with good physique and very good looking when she went to the beach. However, what was in front of her was by far the most beautiful masterpiece she had ever seen in her recently turned 18 years of life. A body that looked as if it had been carved out of ivory by the hand of the finest god, where attention had been paid to every little detail. From the firm, distinct muscles of the arms, abdomen, chest, and legs, to the color of the skin, everything was absolutely perfect. A very charming face accompanied by cold eyes that, for some strange reason, attracted the lady's gaze like magnets, and dark hair now damp and tousled but still alluring. To top it off, the man even had a tool whose size was more than enough to provide the pleasure that every woman desires in their life. Without realizing it, and as if in a trance, Kai Jinji's eyes slid appreciatively over the naked man's body a little more than 5 meters away. Thud! The maid who was in charge of waiting outside for any requests by Xietain might have fainted straight away, and judging by the blush on her face, the reason behind her fall was not due to fear. Xietain had no idea that simply standing there doing nothing while holding a spear had a charm that was simply lethal to any woman. Kai Jinji, what's going on? Xietain naturally understood what was going on. He was not a child who had no idea about life. However, his expression did not change at all, and his heartbeat did not alter in any way. To him, who had showered in blood and crawled out of mountains of corpses, being naked in front of a woman was not reason enough to affect his emotions. Besides, he was proud of himself, so there was no need to act ashamed of anything. Kai Jinji blinked several times as if forcing herself to look away. With what appeared to be a great difficulty and with some unwillingness, she turned to look away while blushing furiously. Even though she had gained a lot of self-confidence and her personality had taken a dramatic turn after all the experiences she had gone through during the past 2 months, she was just an innocent maiden after all. Kai Jinji was sure that she would not be able to erase the image she had just seen for several years at least. Kai Jinji started stuttering and mouthing nonsense letters. However, she soon took a deep breath, and the next moment clarity returned to her eyes as she said in panic, "The sky?" Even though the morning sun was shining high, it suddenly began to fade even with the sun still present. "The sky?" Xietain repeated with a frown as he walked to the bookshelf and grabbed a bathrobe to cover his body. That's right. The sky? Kai Jinji seemed to have finally calmed down completely as she said in a serious voice, "Nanggong Linkson and I were just returning from hunting some evolved beasts in the outer perimeter of the forest, but just as we were on our way to the place where Zhongde and Fu Shuifeng are organizing a dismantling team, the sky suddenly started to get darker and darker until it became almost completely black." Completely black sky? At past 7 o'clock in the morning and with the sun shining present? Xiaomin's expression sank. He wasn't stupid enough to ask Kai Jinji if this phenomenon wasn't perhaps the result of some strange eclipse. Kai Jinji was a student at one of the most prestigious universities on Earth. It was impossible for her not to have thought up the possibility of a mutant eclipse or something. Therefore, it had to be something different. "Come with me," Xietain ordered as he walked past her and disappeared across the corridor in the blink of an eye. Kai Jinji took a step but suddenly stopped and looked at the unconscious maiden, who occasionally shivered as if she was being electrocuted. But Kai Jinji was a woman who knew well what was going on, so she looked at her and whispered, "Oh well, I guess I'll let you have sweet dreams. It's not like it will hurt anyone." After saying such words, Kai Jinji's small body swayed, and along with a sexy movement of her small waist, she disappeared from her previous position in an instant. By the time Xietain arrived at the main gate of the villa, several people had already gathered there. Shangyuan Bingshu, Fu Shuifeng, Nanggong Linkson, Nanggong Yi, Xiaoming, Luoning, and others. Even the 2 pretty twins surnamed Wang were standing next to Wu Yijin, who had awakened a few moments ago. Xietain? Wu Yijin's face, which was still somewhat pale, immediately lit up when she saw him approaching with firm steps. She observed his body carefully, and seeing that he was perfectly fine, subconsciously let out a big sigh of relief as she patted her chest. I'm glad you're okay," Wu Yijin said as she looked him straight in the eyes. When Wu Yijin opened her eyes again a few minutes ago, the first thing she tried to do was to look for Xietain. However, Shangyuan Bingshu stopped her, saying that he was doing something important right now, but he had already fully recovered from his previous wounds. Of course, such a thing was hard to believe, even though Wu Yijin fully trusted her good sister. However, just before she could insist, both women saw the sunlight coming through the window begin to grow dimmer and dimmer. Xietain looked at Wu Yijin with complicated eyes. Even if his heart was made of stone, it was impossible not to be moved when such a beautiful but above all good woman repeatedly showed concern and care for him. "Thank you for your concern. But I'm okay now," he said with a slight smile, this time a real smile and not a fake one put on his face solely for the sake of keeping up appearances. "Also, thanks for earlier. If it wasn't for your appearance, then I might have been forced to use my last resort, which would have given me endless trouble or die after being swallowed by the void." "No, you don't need to thank me for anything." Wu Yijin shook her head as she smiled sweetly toward him. At that moment, Wu Yijin had been watching the portal intently as she anxiously awaited Bai Zemin's return. However, time passed and passed, but he did not come back. The portal was closing, and Wu Yijin's heart felt extremely heavy. She barely held back the urge to go looking for him by her own. However, it was precisely thanks to the fact that she was so attentive that when Bai Zemin hit with his greatsword and managed to tear off a piece of earth from the other side, when the tip crossed the portal, that everyone understood the danger he was in. Had it not been for Wu Yijin's prompt action, Bai Zemin really might have died then. "I would save you 1,000 times over. Even if my life were in danger, I would save you thousands of times more," she said without any shame at being heard by others. "I would rather you not endanger your life," Bai Zemin replied and reached forward with his free hand to pat her tenderly on the head. "But thank you for everything you've done for me so far, and thank you for what you'll probably do from here on out." Wu Yijin was like a little kitten who had returned to where she belonged, since when she felt Bai Zemin's big hand patting her black hair, she closed her eyes and smiled happily. She only needed to purr to change her race. "Off you two, sorry to interrupt, but could you please be more serious? Something big seems to be about to happen. I don't think this is the time for flirting, is it?" As Bai Zemin thanked Wu Yijin from the bottom of his heart for everything, and while she felt warm inside as she felt that her efforts were not wasted at all, a cold and even somewhat grumpy voice sounded from a short distance ahead. Bai Zemin was the first to look in the direction of the source of the voice, and, not to his surprise, he found a frown on Shangyun Bingshu's gorgeous face. From the moment he heard Shangyun Bingshu's voice, Bai Zemin already expected to see a frown on her face. As for the reason, he naturally understood that it was because instead of worrying about what was to come and leaving the rest for when the new problems were solved, what he and Wu Yijin were doing was wasting time. However, Wu Yijin was a woman, and women had an extra sense that men, unfortunately, did not possess. Therefore, even though she was unsure, Wu Yijin felt that Shangyun Bingshu's frown might have a different meaning. It was just that she couldn't understand it either. Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner and the Apocalypse. Chapter 515. Earth on the verge of evolving and 20 million zombies to purge. "Bingshu is right," Bai Zemin said in a serious voice before turning his eyes to the sky with a slight frown. "What is this all about?" he asked, even though inwardly he was aware that he would not have answers soon. Shangyun Bingshu noticed something peculiar about Bai Zemin, and that was that he was clothed only by a bathrobe. Judging by his still damp hair and by his partially uncovered torso at the top between the junction of the neck and chest, it was more than clear that he was taking a bath minutes or even seconds ago. Moreover, Shangyun Bingshu recalled that when Kai Jinji said she would go to inform Bai Zemin about the situation, she was so anxious that it seemed she would not be able to be stopped by just a door. Shangyun Bingshu shook her head to clear the useless thoughts, before looking at the sky and slowly saying, "I don't know. No one knows." She shook her head and frowned slightly. "It was all sudden, but I did notice the surrounding mana stirring unnaturally." Then, she looked at Bai Zemin and asked curiously, "Can you feel it? The surrounding mana is getting heavier and heavier, and even the mana inside my body feels harder to control than usual. It's no big deal, but the change in mana is noticeable to me." The mana became more stirred, more difficult to control? Bai Zemin was surprised. He hadn't noticed anything strange, but he also didn't doubt the words of Shangyun Bingshu, since there was no reason for her to pretend or lie to begin with. Besides, Shangyun Bingshu was also the person with the greatest affinity to mana that Bai Zemin knew so far, and therefore her words were undoubtedly important, and should be taken into consideration seriously. Indeed, as Bai Zemin focused on his surroundings, he not only noticed that the mana invisible to the eyes trembled as if excited about something, but also became denser and heavier compared to the mana he had felt hours ago. "What's this all about?" Bai Zemin muttered again as he walked to stand in front of the rest. He was still holding Annihilation of the Falling Sky tightly as his eyes flashed with a hint of worry. "For some reason, I doubt this is a good thing," Nangong Linkson said in a low voice. Ever since this thing called Soul Record came to Earth, no good things have happened, Xietain replied in a serious voice. In this kind of situation where anything could happen, separating was undoubtedly the worst thing they could do. Only by being together could they explosively increase their survival rate. Even though if something really big were to happen now, it was highly likely that most of the survivors in the settlement would perish. There wasn't much the soul evolvers could do but try to protect themselves and their closest friends or loved ones. As for the rest, they would have to fend for themselves. The human camp served to preserve humanity more safely in the midst of disaster, but in the end, everyone was on their own. This new Earth was susceptible to continual change, since the Soul Record awakened the mana, and with those changes, the death of some was probably inevitable. While the small core of Xietain anxiously awaited a new change, nothing actually happened. After about 20 minutes, the black sky slowly returned to the blue color of any other day with bright sunshine. There was no attack of beasts, no enemies appeared from a portal, no invasion, no meteor shower, no thunderstorms, no hurricane winds, no much less, but there was a noticeable change that this time did not escape anyone's senses. Suddenly, it kind of became a little harder to breathe. Fu Shuifeng said out of nowhere. Indeed, Xietain nodded in agreement. My body feels a little heavier than normal, Kai Jinji pointed out as she took several steps forward and backward. Even my movement speed dropped somewhat. I feel like it's easier to use magic now, Nangang Lingxin said excitedly, even though she also seemed to be experiencing certain minor difficulties. That's true, I can now activate my skills more smoothly. Wu Yijin nodded in agreement with Nangang Lingxin's words, and as if to prove it, she immediately began to play with her hydrokinesis skill, demonstrating different forms for all to see. As everyone expressed aloud with excitement or bewilderment at the changes they were experiencing, Xietain and Shangyun Bingshu looked at each other with confused expressions on their faces. He watched everyone and quietly approached her, before asking in a low voice, "Hey Bingshu, do you feel anything different?" Shangyun Bingshu did not respond immediately, and instead tried to notice some difference. However, she did not notice anything strange, so after a few seconds she shook her head and said with a whispering voice, "Nothing strange for me." Suddenly, she thought of a certain possibility and looked at Xietain with clear eyes as she explained her theory. Could it be that both you and I felt no changes, because we had just recently returned to Earth from a world that had evolved a lot beyond? Xietain looked at her in surprise before realization suddenly hit him. Right? He and Shangyun Bingshu had gone to Oblong World a few hours ago, and were there for several hours. On that world, which was clearly much more evolved than the current Earth, the gravity was at least 3 times that of the blue planet, its size colossal, and natural laws such as the law of sound was tremendously stronger, as even at his peak speed, Xietain did not feel close to the sound barrier on any occasion. If this change that everyone was talking about had happened a few days later, then probably Xietain and Shangyun Bingshu would have noticed it perhaps more clearly than they did. However, after experiencing the abrupt change of moving from planet Earth to Oblong World, it was highly improbable that they would feel any heavier or similar. In fact, from the point of view of Xietain and Shangyun Bingshu, Earth's current gravity was negligible in their eyes, and they would probably be able to move faster than normal, due to the training they had undergone on Oblong World. That makes sense, Xietain said subconsciously. Suddenly, however, his face sank as he thought about something. Shangyun Bingshu noticed the abrupt change in his expression, so she hurriedly asked, "What did you find out?" Xietain did not answer her question, and instead turned to look everyone in the eye. Once he got the desired attention, Xietain said in a deep voice, "Everyone, get ready, Earth is likely to undergo a tremendous change again." The expression of everyone changed terribly when they heard Xietan's words, and added to his serious face, it was clear that he was doing everything except telling jokes. What do you mean? Kang Lan asked in dread. The world that invaded us was a much more evolved world than our world. After spending hours there, my body and Bingshu's body were forced to adapt to many changes, such as increased gravity, increased wind resistance. Except for the excess of mana that the Earth is experiencing now, everything in that world was superior. Therefore, I dare to assume that sooner rather than later the Earth will enter its second evolutionary stage, and when that happens, I fear that the dangers will increase to much higher levels than they are now. The words of Xietain were not any different from dumping a bucket of ice water over the heads of everyone on a snowy night in the middle of winter, sending chills running through everyone's hearts. More changes? They were already going through so much hardship to hold solid ground, and were just slowly regaining the territory that once belonged to humanity, but was now ruled by zombies, but yet even more noticeable changes were coming? Will we survive through this? Nangong Linkson whispered hesitantly. Evangeline looked up at the distant sky and sighed as she said softly, "It was only about 65 days since the whole world changed, and during that time a world power like China collapsed, so I refuse to believe that the rest of the countries in the world are not in similar or even worse situations. If changes of similar magnitude are coming, then it really is a great unknown if humanity will be able to hold the little ground it holds now." Silence immediately ruled the surroundings once Evangeline pointed out what everyone knew in their hearts, but inadvertently refused to accept. The voices of survivors living outside the central area of the Baquin camp could be heard from a distance, as the armed troops tried to quell any commotion that the phenomenon that had just happened may have raised. There were many weaker survivors who fainted directly when the changes in mana occurred, while others fell to the ground while gasping for breath due to the changes in the Earth's gravity. They had been minor changes that anyone could endure. However, humans who had not yet evolved were undoubtedly having a hard time as their organisms adapted as quickly and as well as possible to such changes. Xietain closed his eyes as he felt his surroundings, and when he opened them again, he saw that although the twins surnamed Wang were relatively well, thanks to Bai Yong having fed them the best possible food including evolved beast meat, the two little girls were also having trouble catching their breath. Then, Xietain realized that at this rate everything might collapse. Therefore, he looked at Wu Yijin and ordered in a serious voice, "Wu Yijin, see to it that all the survivors willing to work get once a day a strip of evolved beast meat higher than level 15. Also, take that opportunity to let them understand the governance system of our faction, so that they understand how they can rise in rank to get higher benefits." Understood? Wu Yijin nodded with the same seriousness she saw in the eyes of Xietain. He looked at 4 people and ordered, "Zhongde, Kang Lan, Kai Jinji, Fu Shuifeng. I want you 4 to take a group of survivors and set up stands to recruit new soul evolvers. Those willing to join need not worry about Samis, as the established soul evolvers will take care of helping them until they all reach at least level 5, and will naturally be paid accordingly, depending on their respective performances. Be sure to explain the freedoms they will have within the facility, as well as the priorities that will be given to them and their families over normal survivors in times of crisis. Evangeline, I want you to take 1/3 of the current armed forces and head north. Once there, join Chen He and the 2 legions of armed forces at Beginner Village. I need you to increase the pace so that all survivors will reach the Baquin camp in less than 5 days. Blue Yan, I know what happened to Yan 2 may have you sad, but in this moment you need to stand firm not only for the 20,000 survivors here, nor for the nearly 10,000 survivors who will soon arrive, but for your daughter. Lu Xiaoyao has matured a lot and is slowly becoming a worthy woman who will one day give birth to your future grandchildren. But for that to happen, you have to protect the ground we are standing on." Blue Yan looked at Xietain with complicated eyes. He had heard that Yan Tu challenged a severely injured Xietain in an attempt to take the position of the highest leader for Lu Yan himself. However, Yan Tu failed and as a result, he was naturally killed by Xietain. It would be impossible not to say that Lu Yan felt some hatred for Xietain. After all, Yan Tu was his totally trusted subordinate with whom he had spent many years and who had saved his and his daughter's lives repeatedly. Still, Lu Yan understood that such hatred would only lead him and his daughter to total doom. Therefore, after he heard the words of Xietain, this former leader of the North Camp took a deep breath and nodded, "Tell me what I have to do." Xietain nodded in satisfaction and ordered in a deep voice, "The South Gate. I need you along with 50 soul evolvers and 300 armed men to protect the South Gate for a week's time. If things get ugly, then don't hesitate to call for reinforcements, but preferably try to hold as much as possible in case any beast or any enemy tries to sneak in. Although honestly, the Southern Gate probably will face the least trouble during that time." Even though Lu Yan did not fully understand what Xietain meant, he did not dwell too much on useless questions either. He nodded and said in a deep voice, "Protect the entire South with only 350 men. Leave it to me. For a week, I'll make sure no one gets through that gate before they take my head." Xietain nodded in satisfaction at Lu Yan's words, and then gave one series of orders after another without stopping, and in a matter of 5 minutes, he had delegated tasks to more than 20 people. "What about me?" Shangyun Bingshu approached Xietain curiously. So far, she had not received any tasks. Xietain looked at her for a moment before calmly saying, "Bingshu, you are probably going to be the first to break through the second order in our entire faction, and other than me, right now there is no one capable of stopping your moves for more than a few seconds. Therefore, I need you to stay here to protect the fort." Shangyuan Bingshu was without a doubt the second most powerful existence in the entire Transcendent faction. This was a fact that no one currently doubted. Even Evangeline could not hold firm ground against Shangyuan Bingshu, regardless of whether it was a surprise attack or not, as the difference between the two women had triggered after the war in Oblong World. Shangyuan Bingshu's soul power at this moment was so pure, that only Bai Zemin's soul power surpassed it in terms of purity. She was undoubtedly a terrifyingly strong little charming monster. Bai Zemin would love to count on her to help him in what he planned to do next, but he needed someone trustworthy and strong enough to protect all that he had built up during all this time, as he would soon be away for a few days, and Bai Zemin did not want his efforts to go to hell due to the machinations of minor roles. Therefore, he needed to count on her. It was something Bai Zemin could not do on his own. Shangyuan Bingshu frowned slightly, but seeing the serious look in Bai Zemin's eyes, she realized that he really needed her help this time, so without hesitation, she nodded. Then she asked in a low voice, "What about you?" "Me?" Bai Zemin looked forward with cold eyes before slowly saying, "I have over 20 million zombies to purge." Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner and the Apocalypse. Chapter 516 Beginning of Preparations for Earth's Second Evolution. After Bai Zemin returned to the village, the entire Baquan camp immediately became agitated as each and every task he entrusted began to be carried out to the letter by his subordinates. Fu Shufeng in the company of Zhongde, Kai Jinji, and Kang Lan headed towards one of the places most crowded by all the survivors. "So this is the famous street called Renaissance Street," Fu Shufeng said in wonderment. "If it wasn't for the bad organization, this place would definitely look fabulous now. Even Phoenix Street in our village up north might not be comparable." Renaissance Street was a square space that stretched over 3 kilometers long and 2 kilometers wide. There, regardless of whether they were survivors with good positions within the establishment, or whether it was a survivor struggling to fill their stomach by settling for relief rations, everyone would be able to find something that suited them and their needs. Even soul evolvers often frequented Renaissance Street. The Phoenix Street that Fu Shufeng was talking about was actually the most popular shopping street in Beginning Village. Soul evolvers who went out to hunt on their own or formed groups with acquaintances after finishing their duty hours often took the goods they obtained to Phoenix Street to sell them or to trade with others for something they might need. However, between Renaissance Street and Phoenix Street, there were two notable differences. The first and most obvious difference was that Renaissance Street had at least twice the number of people that walked down Phoenix Street on a daily basis, so the atmosphere was undoubtedly a lot more lively. As for the second difference, it was precisely as Fu Shufeng had said. Because there were so many people of all kinds roaming around the place, brawls would often break out among groups all along Renaissance Street. Furthermore, since the government naturally favored those it was convenient for them to favor, problems were often brushed aside, with the poorest taking the short end of the stick. This was something that in Beginning Village's Phoenix Street did not happen, as the rules in the regime of Bai Zemin were lax for its citizens, but extremely harsh for those who broke them. Even a level 2 noble like Shangyuan Bingshu could not simply go and kill someone just because she felt like doing so, as she would first need to present proof of the reason why she wanted to take the life of ex-survivor. Of course, considering Shangyuan Bingshu's current relationship with Bai Zemin, if she took someone's life first and then explained her motives to Bai Zemin, it was highly doubtful that she would suffer more than a small punishment unworthy of mention. Well, soon this place will also begin to be ruled by Bai Zemin's words, so everything will look more organized, Kang Lan said calmly. Indeed, without a doubt. Zhongde and Fu Shufeng nodded in agreement with Kang Lan's words. When the four of them were alone, there was no need to act strange, so they all referred to Bai Zemin by name, since there were no unfamiliar people among them. As the four of them were the first followers of Bai Zemin, their trust with him was also different from the trust he had with his other subordinates. "Jinji, are you all right?" Kang Lan looked at Kai Jinji with concern. Kai Jinji had been a little weird for the past hour or two. Not only did she not have that trademark smile of hers, but she would occasionally even mutter strange words under her breath or blush tremendously, as if she was suffering from some kind of rare disease. Therefore, Kang Lan finally could not bear this anymore, and decided to ask if everything was all right. However, Kang Lan didn't get any answer as Kai Jinji simply nodded and muttered, I'm fine with it. This girl, she didn't even listen to what we've been talking about all this time." Kang Lan frowned slightly. "Just let her be. Maybe she's tired. A lot has happened in the span of 24 hours after all," Zhongde said calmly as he looked at Kai Jinji, who looked lost. Kang Lan sighed and said no more. In any case, she did not understand the reason why Xietain sent the four of them to accomplish such a simple task that could easily be carried out by one. However, they would soon understand the reason why Xietain did what he did. The so-called Hope Square was an open area approximately 5 kilometers wide x 5 kilometers long. Hundreds of long tree trunks had been haphazardly laid out, and there were also about 40 stands with several large tables each, and a large makeshift roof to protect the workers and food from the rain in case of a storm. This was the place where relief rations were handed out to survivors who simply didn't want to work, didn't have the energy to work, or to those who had no chance of getting a job, because the government felt that jobs like digging holes or building more walls were just a stupid way to waste food on useless survivors. This place always became crowded at exactly the same time, but there were also a few survivors who, for the sake of saving energy, simply slept right there, despite the ridicule they received every time another survivor passed by them. These survivors knew very well that all they were doing was waiting for death to take them, and that they would not be able to resist much longer at this rate. However, after more than 60 days of being malnourished, their bodies naturally ceased to be what they were in peak condition, so that now even if they wanted to go out and fight the zombies or beasts, they barely had the energy to walk several steps, let alone pick up a spear or a sword. In fact, there were many survivors who in the past did not want to work, let alone go out to fight, but after experiencing for several weeks how terrifying it was to feel their lives slowly fading away, they wanted to do anything in exchange for being able to have good food on a daily basis. It was just that with their current conditions that opportunity had already disappeared from their lives from the moment they began to slowly rot away. It was around 10 o'clock in the morning, and even though it was still 2 hours before it was time to deliver the relief rations, there were more than 600 survivors who had already gathered and many more who were slowly approaching from different corners of the base. Just at that moment, a small commotion arose when under everyone's surprised eyes, 5 cargo trucks slowly approached the center of Hope Square. Bang! Ah! What is that? Monster? Idiot! Stop pushing and don't run anymore. It's a soul evolver. The survivors panicked and many of them broke into a run when they saw Nangongyi using his second-order dragon transformation skill, newly evolved, and descending from one of the trucks with a mighty leap. Nangongyi frowned at the commotion and not wanting more trouble to appear than they already had, he shouted loudly, "All of you, shut your mouths." His voice was like the true roar of a beast that spread far and wide and reached with precision each of the survivors who were still trying to flee. Although it was loud and frightening, it really was an effective method since, as if by prior agreement, they all stopped until they slowly realized that their lives were not in danger, and only then did they relax enough to observe the situation in more detail. HMPH. Why the hell do I have to do this anyway? Nangongyi complained in a low voice. Due to his skill, his voice sounded hoarser than normal, and it was really awkward to listen to. Don't complain. Xietain has another task to complete, and Yantu was killed by Xietain because of his betrayal. Only you alone can move those beasts without moving several soul evolvers. At that moment, an extremely beautiful voice similar to silver bells ringing softly amidst the gentle spring breeze sounded from inside one of the cargo trucks. Under the dazed eyes of the survivors, the most beautiful woman they had ever seen in their lives slowly descended from the cab. Wu Yijin was wearing a robe with good defensive properties of rank 1, that although not as beautiful as the clothes she loved so much, had been forged by her loved one, so the value of this robe in her eyes was priceless. Furthermore, even though the robe was dull in color and lacked the decorations that the ladies loved so much, Wu Yijin's body was just too sexy, so regardless of what she wore and in conjunction with her innocent face, she would always look beautiful. She 100% ignored everyone's stares, and with a slight smile said to Nangongyi, "Besides, this was Xietan's order, so unless you want to get a beating, you better get to work. I really need to contact the Organization for the Protection of Endangered Animals." Nangongyi complained quietly. Wu Yijin shook her head as she smiled bitterly. Nangongyi was old enough to be her father, but he actually liked to joke around quite often. In case anyone didn't understand, Nangongyi is currently transformed into a dragon, hence his words in the above paragraph. Under the surprised eyes of the survivors, Nangongyi, with the help of the drivers, opened the box that hid the contents of the trucks. Immediately, there was another small commotion as Nangongyi began to carry and unload from the trucks the bodies of 5 tigers, whose sizes were comparable to that of 2 tigers together each. For these survivors living behind the base walls, this was probably the first time they had seen mutated beasts since, except at the beginning of the apocalypse, when the zombies began to roam and kill anything that moved. They had not had the courage to go out. These 5 creatures had been hunted precisely to fulfill part of the task that Xietain had given Wu Yijin. The beast's name was Sailing Tiger, and it was an agility-type beast whose levels were 15, 16, 18, 20, and 21. Once Nangongyi took down the lifeless sailing tigers from the trucks, a team of more than 100 people began to work after taking down the tools from the trucks. All they had to do was to process the meat, blood, fat, cartilage, gallbladder, liver, heart, and anything else that could somehow be consumed by the human body, since previously a different team had taken the pelts, claws, and teeth of the beasts. Approximately 3 hours later, Hope Square became more populated with around 7,000 survivors. This caused a deep frown to appear on Wu Yijin's pretty face, as she realized that more than 1/3 of the total population of Baekwon Camp was actually destitute. This was certainly far more than she expected to find. 1 hour later, the mouths of all the survivors turned to water, and their stomachs began to growl, as if the beast within them had finally found a purpose for which to awaken. This was not for nothing, as from the 40 food stalls and the more than 100 tables that had been set up at each of them, an extremely delicious smell of cooked meat began to emanate. Even though it was only cooked meat, it had been 2 months since these survivors had tasted any of meat, so when they smelled that familiar yet unfamiliar scent, they all looked at each other in disbelief. None of them could even believe in the possibility that they were going to be fed with meat instead of rice water. However, when the armed man guarding each station with a light machine gun gave the signal under the consent of the beautiful woman who watched calmly from the side, and when the first survivor received a bowl filled to the brim with meat soup, these survivors finally realized that all this was really happening, and that it was not a trick played by hunger. That first survivor did not even wait to get to one of the trunks to sit down, when the hunger that threatened to drive him mad forced him to take the first spoonful of meat soup into his mouth. The steps of the man froze and his eyes widened in shock. Those closest to him noticed that the 30-plus-year-old man's pupils trembled as if he had experienced some kind of shock. However, just as everyone was wondering if the meat soup was actually contaminated, and the thought of retreating was beginning to be born in the hearts of all, that first survivor suddenly went mad as he began to ferociously gulp down the bowl of broth, as if it were some kind of divine delicacy. "I want more. Please give me one more bowl and I won't eat tomorrow." The man turned around and knelt down on his knees as he looked at the armed soldier with pleading eyes. The armed man frowned and was about to punch the man for getting in the way of the line, when a clear voice rang out across Hope Square. "All those of you who have finished your portions, please stay a little longer, as I have an important announcement to make, one which will undoubtedly be to the liking of many of you." Wu Yijin stood on the roof of one of the trucks and said slowly, "Of course, those who wish to leave are free to do so, and will still receive daily rations. However, those who leave today without listening will definitely regret it for the rest of their lives." "I'll stay, of course I'll stay," the survivor who had tasted the meat soup shouted shrilly before standing up and running over to a trunk to sit down and look at the large pot greedily. If it wasn't for the sanity he still had, this man would definitely have jumped, regardless of the armed soldier a few meters away. Wu Yijin nodded in satisfaction, as this was the result she expected, before ordering, "Continue without blocking the line, or you will be punished severely. If you behave yourselves, you will all be given one more bowl later." The carrot and the stick. Wu Yijin was really the daughter of a family full of politicians after all. But the hit and then caress method actually proved effective once again, as soon the lines began to move. When the second survivor tasted the meat soup, her reaction was exactly the same as the first. The same happened with the third, with the fourth, the fifth, the sixth. Soon, more than 3,000 survivors had received green messages in their retinas. "You have received health +3, you have received strength +4. You have received stamina +3. You have received agility +4. When the words of the meat soup was actually extremely beneficial to the body, and when the other survivors noticed how the conditions of those who had tried it improved markedly in a matter of seconds, another commotion arose. Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner and the Apocalypse. Chapter 517. Humans and rats are not so different after all. "I suddenly feel stronger than before," murmured an old man in disbelief as he looked at the now empty bowl in his hands. "Mom, I don't feel as bad as I did a moment ago. Can I have more of that delicious soup?" A boy who had been suffering from fever for 2 days straight looked at his mother with pleading eyes. "Awesome. What kind of meat is that?" "It's the tigers. The evolved tigers." Wu Yijin and Nan Gongyi calmly observed as the 7,000-plus survivors became agitated after eating a taste of the food they had received. Not only was the soup made mainly from the meat of evolved beasts whose levels ranged from 15 to 21 extremely delicious, but to these survivors who were only level 0 existences, it was a divine treasure sent from the heavens. The meat of the evolved tigers not only served to improve to amazing degrees the weakened bodies of these survivors who had been going through poor nutrition for several weeks, but also served to lay the foundation and raise their natural stats to new heights once their bodies were fully recovered. How could they not be shaken after tasting such a high-quality delicacy? They all couldn't wait to try more. Give me more? I want more. Please, I'll do anything. However, as the saying goes, in a big forest, there are all kinds of birds. Among the little more than 7,000 survivors, there were some who were desperate to regain their strength so they could do their best for themselves. Now that the medicine for a speedy and complete recovery had appeared before their eyes, many of them would naturally not be willing to let the opportunity slip through their fingers. Like a seemingly unstoppable tsunami, more than 200 survivors suddenly charged toward the 40 food stands as they stared at the giant pots with greed-filled eyes that seemed to glow with green light, similar to that of a wolf that had only the meat of its prey in its eyes. The expressions on the faces of the 40 armed men changed tremendously as they saw the wave of humans running desperately toward them. They subconsciously raised their guns, but just as they were about to open fire, a soft voice caused their movements to stop automatically. "I'll take care of this for now." Wu Yijin took a step forward and frowned slightly at the sight of the charging crowd. Although she had expected something similar, she hoped it wouldn't happen. However, since trouble had appeared, it was better to deal with it as soon as possible. Besides, since she already expected that something like this might happen, it wasn't as if Wu Yijin was too surprised to act on it. "Whip them all," she whispered as she pointed her impeccable fingers straight ahead. The few surrounding plants suddenly glowed with a faint emerald green radiance and came to life. The little over 200 survivors had only one target in mind, so they didn't even notice that over 300 branches elongated tens of meters in an instant like tentacles and crawled at lightning speed behind each of them. "Ah!" The first one's cry of pain was the bell that announced disaster for each of these 200-plus out-of-control survivors. Bang, 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 bang. The sound of flesh being torn by the fierce lashes and flesh being mercilessly whipped resounded in sync with the cries of pain, as well as the pleas and wails of those who, after being beaten, finally began to wake up. However, Wu Yijin shook her head. "Continue to whip them," she said, this time without mercy and without allowing her kindness to win over her logic. The plants heard her soft voice and became even more ferocious in their attacks. Regardless of whether it was teenagers, women, men, elders, or even children, they were all whipped until their skin split and blood began to flow. Although Wu Yijin did not feel comfortable punishing so many people this mercilessly, Shangyun Bingshu had made one thing clear to her before leaving towards Hope Square, something Wu Yijin could not deny. If Wu Yijin did not do her job well, then she would be causing Bai Zemin more trouble, more than he already had on his back. This was something she definitely did not want to happen. What Wu Yijin aspired to become was a woman who would be able to help him, and unfortunately for her, her combat ability would probably never be enough to stand up alongside him as an equal. Therefore, she could only do what she could to the best of her ability. Helping him build the kingdom he aspired to build was, for now, the wisest way. Moreover, Wu Yijin had also realized something else, and that was that if it had not been for her stepping forward just in time, 40 machine guns would have mercilessly opened fire on the 200 or so survivors. At this point, the place would have turned into a slaughterhouse, and it was only thanks to her that this could have been avoided. Precisely because she wanted everyone to learn the consequences of trying to make more trouble than humanity already had, Wu Yijin showed no mercy and whipped everyone to the brink of fainting. As the other survivors in Hope Square and those who were just passing by were shocked and frightened to see the terrifying behavior of the plants that previously only swayed gently in the natural wind, Wu Yijin ordered the plants to stop. Groans and cries of pain were the only sounds that could be heard before she said in a voice clear enough for all to hear, "The people who just disobeyed my previous instruction are out of the system that will soon be opened. Also, as a consequence of the fall made by a few, everyone present will also not be able to have a second bowl of food today." Immediately, an even bigger wave rose up as Wu Yijin's words clicked in the minds of each of the survivors. "What? Why? We haven't done anything wrong? You bastards? Because of these bastards now we all have to suffer. Kill them, kill them, kill them." No one knew who started it, but suddenly everyone looked at the 200 or so survivors who had created trouble with red eyes, as if they wanted to devour their flesh, and sending shivers down their spines that served to awaken them from the pain that consumed them. However, no one stepped forward. They had all learned their lesson this time. "Silence," Wu Yijin ordered in a loud voice. Once everyone calmed down, she ignored the death glares that the nearly 7,000 were giving to the little over 200 and said slowly, "I have no idea how things worked before, but now that the former leaders of this base were overthrown, things will change, and since this is a base, that is, a unit, everyone here will have to function as one. If you are aware that any of you wish to commit an act that will surely be punished, then to avoid trouble yourself stop that person or warn in advance." The words of Wu Yijin were a great wake-up call that sounded the alarms of all these survivors, and even those who were just passing through the place, or who were attracted by the aroma of the cooked meat, began to pay more attention. Until yesterday, many of you might have complaints in your hearts regarding not having the energy to work or feeling resentment towards the higher-ups at the base, because no one gave you a chance to prove yourselves. Wu Yijin said indifferently. However, from this very moment on, none of you will have anything to complain about. Wu Yijin looked at Nan Gongyi, and when the latter saw her nod toward him, he realized it was his turn. Nan Gongyi took a step forward, this time with his skill deactivated, and shouted loudly, "Listen well, because I will not repeat myself twice. Our current leader, Bai Zemin, is a kind man who is even willing to invest high-level creature meat that could easily be treated as luxury food in survivors like you who have no power whatsoever. However, every act always has a price, and even the kindness of God has its limits, let alone the kindness of a human." The corner of Wu Yijin's mouth twitched several times as she listened to Nan Gongyi's speech, but since his words seemed to be working, she said nothing about it, and simply listened from the side in silence. As you all have already proven, this kind of meat can bring your bodies back to their respective peak conditions of the past, and even lead you to become more powerful people. Now, pay close attention. All those who wish to become a soul evolver and thus gain enough power to never again be humiliated, to never again suffer hunger, to be able to fight alongside me and our brothers on the battlefield shoulder to shoulder with the leader, I want you to move to the right. Just this time, our elite team will help you all level up by completely incapacitating the zombies, so you don't have to fear them. At first, many hesitated. But when the last quarter of the speech of Nan Gongyi reached everyone, he immediately noticed how many people's eyes lit up brightly. Having learned from the previous case, this time everyone struggled to contain their emotions and silently began to move to the right side of the large square, while keeping their eyes fixed on Nan Gongyi and Wu Yijin, as if they feared that both of them would suddenly run away. However, the matter at hand was that something that neither Nan Gongyi nor Wu Yijin expected actually did happen. This Wu Yijin watched in astonishment as nearly half of all the starving and destitute survivors walked towards the right side of Hope Square. All of them walked with somewhat weak steps, their clothes were dirty, their bodies released foul odor, their hair was a mess, some even fell down several times due to the miserable situation they were in. However, all of them had bright eyes brimming with determination. Even those who fell to the ground struggled to stand up or simply crawled while digging their nails into the hard earth. Nan Gongyi was dumbfounded before bursting out laughing and saying loudly, "Aren't I amazing? This major here managed to make the largest mass recruitment of future soul evolvers. I think I deserve a promotion and several beautiful women for myself." Wu Yijin looked at him with disdain before turning his eyes towards the 3,000 or so survivors who had decided to risk their lives to fight, even and in the unlikely event that half of them regretted their decision when they saw the zombies again, there would still be 1,500 future soul evolvers. 1,500 soul evolvers in the worst case? This was a number that even now the Transcendent faction was far from reaching. Then, Wu Yijin remembered something her grandfather had once told her, but she had been unable to understand. Just as rats when cornered by cats attack, when humans are driven to the brink of insanity, they can sometimes make self-destructive decisions. However, in times of crisis, only by having the resolve to die could one have a small chance of changing one's fate. Stand still and wait for death to embrace you, or fight and let death embrace you, or perhaps death will be too tired to fight you at that moment, and you can go on living longer than you were supposed to live. Wu Yijin did not expect that her assignment to improve the survivors' nutrition, explain the new rules, and finally recruit a few workers would actually end up turning into such a miracle. However, if Wu Yijin thought about it carefully, she would realize that there really wasn't much to be surprised about. It had been 65 days since everything changed. 2 long months during which all these survivors had lived a life worse than death in many ways, and barely held on to a weak flame called existence. At the end of the day, humans were also a kind of animal that went through the cycle of life and death just like all living things. Humans also grew tired. Humans could also turn into wild beasts after being beaten hard for so long. Wu Yijin took a deep breath, and at the same time as her chest lowered along with her exultation, a beautiful smile appeared on her face. This was undoubtedly a pleasant surprise that he would surely be happy to know. She stepped forward and shouted in delight, "All those with knowledge in biology, botany, electricity, mechanics, construction, medicine, chemistry, music, cooking, please step to the left. All those who have no particular knowledge about a field, but have the willingness to work on building defenses for the base, such as digging a ditch around the settlement, please stay in your places." Wu Yijin announced the mass recruitment of survivors with knowledge in over 20 different fields, and soon things began to move. There were approximately 10 of the just over 3,000 who previously wanted to be soul evolvers, who announced they were experts in biology or chemistry, so they were also recruited immediately. She and a new group assigned by Shangwen Bingshu to assist her began to record the data of the survivors. Even after hours of work, Wu Yijin did not complain, and the smile on her face did not waver. None of the survivors who arrived at Hope Square today other than the 200 who broke the rules earlier were out of work. All of them would soon join the system created by Xietain and his trusted subordinates to give even more life to the ever larger and firmer faction. While all these changes, big or small, were taking place, the man in question was away from home, while observing one of the largest bridges in all of China. Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner and the Apocalypse. Chapter 518 Eastern Dragon's Back. On the eve of attack, the forests in China were already large to begin with, and many brave explorers had been lost in the deep mountains, only to never hear of them again. Even to this day, it was unknown whether they had died with the passage of time, or had been eaten by some feral animal. However, the arrival of the soul record on Earth changed everything, and the already vast forests of China turned into their own worlds. Trees that rose into the sky with the intention of caressing the clouds with their leaves, mutant plants that camouflaged themselves and pretended to be only inanimate objects with the intention of catching their prey unawares, fantasy creatures that could easily become the protagonists of a horror movie or a mythological story, and who knows how many more mysteries they hid in their depths. But one of the most terrifying things was that even the cities were slowly turning into forests, forests which at some point could be occupied by more beasts or any other vicious race. There was no doubt that mankind was losing in this battle for survival. The human body was weak, and the fact that they were emotional beings did not help much in this kind of circumstances either, compared to the beasts that possessed extremely tenacious bodies, or compared to the goblins that were war machines from the moment they were born. Mankind was like a baby that was just learning to walk. The howling wind brought with it the freezing cold of the slow but sure fall of dusk. The pure smell of nature devoid of much of the past pollution in company with the beautiful sunset that was beginning to rise on the distant horizon, created an extremely beautiful place similar to a vivid painting. Normally, at this time of day, the beasts would begin to roar as the descent of night was when they became especially more active. Strangely, however, there was no sound from within the woods. Swoosh! Suddenly, a particularly powerful gale blew in and from the distance brought with it a strange iron smell, the characteristic smell of blood. A black-clad silhouette slowly approached from the northern forest. His footsteps were extremely soft, so much so that they produced practically no sound at all when the battle boots came into contact with the solid earth covered with dead leaves. In the right hand of the silhouette was a golden spear of exquisite appearance, and his appearance was simply the very description of the word charm. But the most striking thing would probably be the 4-meter-tall deer that the man was dragging behind him. Of course, this person was none other than Xietain, who had left the base to head for the only relatively close place through which he and his faction could cross to continue their route in a southerly direction. Bang! Xietain dropped the body of the deer heavily on the ground and looked up at the sky with narrowed eyes. It really isn't easy. If it weren't for my strength, trying to cross so many kilometers of roads covered by thick grass and surrounded by all sorts of creatures would be no different from committing suicide. Xietain sighed as he recalled his journey to reach the bridge known as Eastern Dragon's Back, due to its extensive length. Xietain had only covered approximately 200 to 300 kilometers, which was not too much in reality, and even less so considering his movement speed. However, the amount of work he had to do along the route kept him busy for more than 6 whole hours. After not being used for so long and with the forests constantly expanding, the roads heading south were in a state that could only be called deplorable. The roots of countless trees had begun to spread underground as they grew larger and larger after being fed by the mana of the world, which inadvertently ended up causing the road to break down. Huge trees that had been felled probably by some giant creature blocking the road. Xietain even found a nest of mutant snakes that were over 10 meters long, each directly 5 meters away from the main road. To make the most of the time and to avoid wasting time waiting for others, Xietain set to work by himself. To begin with, he was used to doing hard work anyway, so it was no big deal, since Xietain had never been a spoiled young man, considering his past economic position. Since Xietain could not afford to have too much manpower right now, as most of his forces were focusing on capturing firm control over Baquin Camp, or on the large-scale move from the north to the south, so it was better to get to work on his own, rather than wait for days to pass stupidly. Although it was a bit tedious, after about 5 hours of work, he managed to craft a road wide enough and relatively safe, through which a convoy of several sizable vehicles could pass. The number of beasts he faced and killed was several thousand. Honestly, Xietain stopped counting when the numbers exceeded 3 figures. He took only 2 corpses with him. One of them was the deer lying on the ground, and the other was inside his storage ring. Since the bodies of the evolved beasts were generally too large, Xietain did not want to take up too much space of his spatial storage ring. So, he simply took all the soul stones he could take, and stored the blood he could save in the liquid storage pearl before continuing on his way. I guess I'll have Shangyu and Bingshu to send someone to take care of those bodies. That should be a few tons of meat and plenty of resources to build equipment. Xietain muttered as he waved his hand and took several things from inside his spatial storage ring. Pots, pans, a carafe with a small portable stove, a lighter, vegetables, rice, a cutting board, chopsticks, soybean oil, salt, pepper, and many more condiments. Having a space storage ring was undoubtedly a tremendous relief. Xietain felt that the current him could not live a day if his ring was taken away from him, now that he had tasted the forbidden fruit. Xietain was not a genius in the kitchen, but at least he could fend for himself. At the very least, Xietain was confident he wouldn't starve to death, even if he ended up being alone for the rest of time without a female partner to rely on and to share. Right now I'm really thankful I wasn't born into a rich family. Xietain chuckled as he recalled how Chenny once burned the roast beef he tried to prepare together with other soul evolvers as a celebration after migrating all the survivors from the North Camp to the beginner village. 1 hour later, Xietain managed to prepare several dishes using deer meat. Roast meat, fried meat, braised meat, steamed meat, sautéed vegetables, fried vegetables, boiled rice, fried rice with tomato sauce, etc. Although it wasn't a great variety, Xietain didn't mind. To begin with, he wasn't picky about food. As long as he could fill his stomach with something edible, Xietain would be more than satisfied. His personality had been molded from the moment he decided to become independent, so as not to make things difficult for his younger sister or anyone else in his family. This is good, not as good as King Ming's food, but good in the end. Xietain muttered as he chewed on a piece of tender meat. The evolved beast meat was simply delicious. Even the worst cook in the world could prepare a delicacy with it if it existed before the apocalypse. Xietain took his time to eat, and as he sat on the corpse of the giant deer, he began to think carefully about what he would do next. Eastern Dragon's back is about 100 kilometers long and approximately 200 meters wide. It was built in the year 1959, and once every 20 years, constant inspections and improvements were made to prevent its deterioration. Considering that we are currently in the year 2022, the third inspection was only about 3 or 4 years ago, so the bridge should be in optimal condition. Even if several hundred vehicles modified with heavy body parts of different beasts were to pass over the bridge, Eastern Dragon's back will definitely be able to withstand. However, Xietain paused as he thought this far and frowned tightly. However, I doubt that the bridge could withstand the confrontation between 2 second-order beings. No. Even the battle between 2 first-order beings would probably end up collapsing the bridge sooner or later. The shockwaves from the battle between first-order beings could not be underestimated at all, since if those fighting were strength-focused powerhouses or possessed overly destructive skills, everything within a radius of between 10 and 20 meters would surely be crushed. Although the Eastern Dragon's Back Bridge had been built and modified with the best possible materials to avoid problems for obvious reasons, as considering the size of the bridge, a collapse would represent one of mankind's greatest catastrophes, Xietain had no confidence that the bridge could withstand too much in the apocalypse. I'm afraid I'll have to make sure to finish every battle as fast as possible. More importantly, I have to be careful with my attacks. Xietain immediately began to feel a tremendous headache, even though he was only going over what he could and could not do, as well as thinking up new ideas. Gravity manipulation is a big no-no. Crimson Blood Judgment is out of the equation. I can't afford to use this destructive skill, even if a dangerous enemy appears, or else the bridge will undoubtedly fall. My Greatsword Crimson Thunder Dragon's last words can't participate here either. As for annihilation of the falling sky, I'd better keep its spear form. This way I'll avoid the air cannons caused by the explosions of a greatsword, and at the same time I'll be able to finish off enemies without letting them get too close of me. Because the bloodthirsty wolf full-body armor of Xietain had been practically completely destroyed after experiencing so many battles to the death during the invasion of Oblong World, Xietain naturally could not use it, as it was really useless at this point. In fact, it was not just his armor. Xietan's shoulder pads, as well as his leg protectors, had been partially or completely destroyed in Oblong World. Moreover, since all his forging tools were in the beginning village, he also could not afford to forge new armor or any piece of equipment too extravagant to him. After all, Xietain had no choice but to rely on the normal hammer used by the blacksmiths that Camp Baquin had. Of course, he was still able to forge a rank 1 armor with 600 points of physical defense. However, it was far from being comparable to his past rank 2 armor, with over 1,000 points of physical defense. Although the current Xietain was more experienced than in the past regarding blacksmithing and working with leather, he had actually been lucky back then when his now destroyed bloodthirsty wolf full-body armor was born. Furthermore, while he could have increased the quality of the armor by embedding some soul stone, Xietain felt that it was a waste to use a soul stone in a suit of armor that would be replaced sooner rather than later. After Xietain spent the entire morning using the hammer, chisel, anvil, tongs, and other tools to craft a new leather armor to fit his immediate needs, as well as a new pair of shoulder pads and leg protectors, Xietain left the base, but not before telling Shangyu and Bingshu about it. Now, he was only 500 meters away from his real target. Even from here, I can sense several strong auras mixed in among a huge horde of undead creatures. Xietain frowned harder and harder as he realized that this task might be more difficult than he initially estimated. Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner and the Apocalypse. Chapter 519 Fighting Alone Against Millions of Enemies, Part 1. Instead of launching an attack now that the day was almost over, Xietain decided to get a good night's sleep to replenish his stamina to the maximum. After all, even though he was still almost at full power, all the work he had been forced to do during part of the morning and most of the evening was really mentally exhausting. Besides, fighting zombies in the middle of the night was not something Xietain preferred to do, at least not until he adapted to fighting an endless horde of creatures that felt no pain, fear, and never tired. While Xietain had fought and killed countless zombies so far, this would undoubtedly be the first time he would be fighting a horde of millions of them. In fact, this would be the largest battle Xietain was going to experience, as far as the number of enemies was concerned. Even now I'm not sure if my skin is able to handle the sharp claws of the zombies. Xietain shook his head as he looked at the starry sky above his head with a thoughtful look on his face. While the silver skin of Xietain had strengthened his outer skin tremendously to the point where even high-caliber bullets could not pierce through it, he was not 100% sure that it could withstand the claws of the zombies, since zombies, just like humans and beasts, were constantly evolving. The weakest zombie now was probably level 10, and zombies of level 12 or higher would not be uncommon either. If not for the fact that zombies were mindless and extremely slow beings that only relied on primal instincts, the zombie race would undoubtedly be the ruler of this world by now. It was only because zombies were so slow that even a normal human had some chance of victory, as long as they were careful. Of course, the current zombies were creatures capable of creating holes in concrete walls with their fists, which was a big difference compared to the zombies Xietain faced in college, zombies which could barely break wooden doors with their sharp nails. Tomorrow, I will take the opportunity to test the zombies bit by bit. Even I can't do anything against mana infection, better to be safe than sorry later. Xietain made up his mind before closing his eyes preparing to sleep. He had opened a sizable hole in a thick tree trunk and crawled in there to use it as a temporary shelter. In addition, he had scattered powder from a ground-up plant that was discovered 2 weeks ago by his faction's botany team in the surrounding area of the main base. The name of this plant was sulfur orchid. Its name came from the shape of its leaves that resembled small stars, as well as the strong smell that was really repulsive. When the botany team number 3 in charge of studying the effect of this new plant that appeared on Earth after the world began to evolve, they realized that while humans were able to tolerate the strong smell of the plant without problems, the unclassified beasts really detested the smell to the point where they stayed as far away as possible, unless they were really attracted by something especially strong. While beasts of first order and up were immune, the effect of the sulfur orchid was good enough to keep dozens of soul evolvers and human teams from wandering a bit more confidently into the forests. In addition, another positive point was that during the night they could spread the powder of the plant, which was stronger than the naturally released odor, and although it lasted less than if the plant was alive, it was enough to last at least one night. The next day, I sure slept great. Xietain climbed out of the hollowed-out trunk and began to stretch his body while looking at the bright sun. It was past 8 in the morning, but Xietain had slept like a baby until a minute or two ago. The effect of the powder he had dispersed around the area he was staying in had worked wonderfully, as throughout the night, despite hearing fierce roars, Xietain had not been disturbed by any unusual creatures. The powder of the sulfur orchid, in conjunction with the fact that Xietain was only on the outer perimeter of the forest, had helped to avoid first order and above beasts that only left their territories in extremely rare cases. As for the unclassified beasts, the plant did the job. After stretching to release his slightly locked muscles, Xietain put everything back into his storage ring and took up annihilation of the falling sky before looking in a southerly direction with a faint smile. "Well, let's get some morning exercise," Xietain said as he slowly walked forward. Boom, bang, boom, bang. Booms and bangs resounded through the previously silent woodland. Xietain swung his spear from left to right with masterful skill, thanks to his blood berserker job, which increased his knowledge of weapons such as spears tremendously in a passive way. Each swing was accompanied by a wind blade that cut through the trees, branches, vines, and roots that covered the path to the south. After removing these obstacles, Xietain destroyed the annoying concrete road that not even an off-road truck could pass through, and opened a large channel that linked up with the road he had been building since yesterday. Of course, the noise he was making attracted the forest residents, who apparently were not pleased with the human visit. Roar! A green-colored shadow let out a strange sound that sounded like a somewhat weak roar. The beast was undoubtedly a creature whose stats were mainly focused on agility, as its movements and the speed at which it charged forward would only allow a level 30 first-order soul evolver to see a flash before their bodies were cut in two halves. Swoosh! The green shadow leaped towards the channel, but just as it was 5 meters away from Xietain, a flash of golden light swooshed before the eyes of the beast. As if time had stopped for a second, the creature seemed to stop in mid-leap before a glint of disbelief flashed in its formerly wild eyes. Splash! A second later, the body of the beast split in half from front to back, and blood splashed everywhere, along with the monster's internal organs and guts. "You have received the soul power of First Order Green Claw Cat level 34. Xietain pierced the head of the monster, but he did not find any soul stone. Then, he waved his spear 4 times and cut off the 4 legs of the beast, before casually tossing them into his storage ring. After that, Xietain continued to advance as he finished building a descent path for his troops to pass through. Of course, throughout the process, the noise and explosions continued attracting more and more beasts. However, the highest level of these creatures was 43 at the most, so they were all completely slaughtered without mercy by Xietain. Approximately 40 minutes later, and after having gathered a total of 6 first-order soul stones and over 200 unclassified soul stones, Xietain finally finished his task. Moreover, he finally spotted his main target. This was the same giant bridge that he had seen countless times so far, for when he went to visit his loved ones during rest days or summer vacations. However, apart from its colossal size, its majestic and vivid appearance was nowhere to be seen anymore. Thousands of cars were piled up along the sides of the 200 meters wide bridge, partially covering the view. Some of these cars were wrecked, others had simply been abandoned by their owners during the first day of the apocalypse, and others had been crushed by something that was definitely not human, since the condition they were in was not much different from what they would have looked like if a bulldozer had run over them. Broken glass, light beacons fallen to the ground, shattered billboards, even the checkpoint blocking the entry to the bridge was not unlike a haunted house at this point. Dried blood, white bones, and even hair stuck to tough pieces of flesh could be seen on the ground, as mutant flies between 5 and 10 centimeters long wandered around the area, noisily buzzing their wings. Xietain even saw on the side of the bridge the scales and spines of what looked like it had once been a fish whose size was comparable to a house nearly 3 meters high and over 6 meters long. These kinds of sights really don't help improve the mood in the morning. Xietain muttered as he walked step by step forward. His black eyes flashed in a strange way as he gazed at the seemingly endless sea of heads bobbing back and forth a little over 100 meters ahead. After 2 months, the corrupted mana inside the zombies' bodies began to corrode their systems, to the point where those that had failed to evolve had practically lost any resemblance they may have previously had to a human being, except for the fact that they walked on 2 legs. Xietain did not know if as the months and years passed the zombies would die on their own. However, if someone were to ask him about it, he would bet an arm that such a thing would not happen. On the contrary, I bet the infecting power of these damn creatures just got even more terrifying now. He clicked his tongue as he slowly began to pick up the pace. When Xietain was only 50 meters away from the bridge, the first head abruptly turned in his direction. 50 meters? Xietain was inwardly surprised. He could still remember that not so long ago, zombies had a maximum detection range of 30 meters. How could it be possible that in a matter of 3 or 4 days these zombies had received such a huge upgrade? Xietain felt his mind go blank before he associated this phenomenon with yesterday's phenomenon. The impending evolution of the Earth was slowly but surely affecting the zombies. Except for their numbers, zombies were undoubtedly the weakest race on Earth. However, to compensate for the lack of intelligence, their slowness, and lack of a powerful physical body, these zombies were constantly getting stronger just by the mere act of absorbing mana and corrupting it into their organisms. Growl. The first zombie let out a strange growl, and as if it was some kind of alarm, all the surrounding zombies turned their faces to look in Xietain's direction. The completely wide eyes revealed that the creatures had no sight, but their sense of smell and hearing worked perfectly as they nonchalantly began to walk towards the approaching human. Any other soul evolver would probably turn around in fear at the sight of the terrifying appearances of hundreds of packaged zombies, advancing at the same time like a well-trained army. However, Xietain was anything but an ordinary soul evolver. He had slaughtered hundreds of thousands of enemies on his own, and had annihilated the entire population of a city comparable to the size of a minor country. By the time the distance between Xietain and the zombies closed to 30 meters, his steps could no longer be called walking, he was jogging. At 20 meters distance, Xietain's jogging speed had increased to that of a soul evolver, with 30 agility points. At 10 meters away, he was running while making use of 80 agility points. And, not even a second later, Xietain suddenly seemed to vanish from his previous position. Xietain appeared as if by magic 50 meters ahead, right behind the first wave of zombies. His body was straight and firm as a tower, while the golden spear in his right hand rested the back of it on the ground, while the tip pointed skyward. The wind blew at the zombies that had suddenly stopped, and an instant later, their bodies split into thousands of pieces. Blood, chunks of flesh, rotting organs, guts, brain matter, and dozens of unclassified soul stones fell to the ground at the same time. Time to get the crap out of the way. Xietain's cold voice rang out amidst the growls of the zombies in front of him and around him. The only free place he had was about 4 meters around and the blood path he had opened a moment ago. However, Xietain naturally wasn't interested in backing down. Swoosh, 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 swoosh. The surrounding zombies hadn't even turned around completely after sensing his soul power beside them, when Xietain turned his body 360 degrees, while swinging his spear in a wide golden circle. Air blades bathed in golden light spread out at lightning speed, and the bodies of dozens of zombies immediately turned into a pile of minced flesh in tiny pieces. Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner and the Apocalypse. Chapter 520 Fighting Alone Against Millions of Enemies, Part 2. The first wave of zombies that attacked Xietain was composed of approximately 200 beings whose systems had been corrupted since day 1 of the apocalypse. The second was composed of approximately 50 or so, considering that while Xietain had not taken a run to take advantage of the momentum and eliminate more zombies, he had used the extension of his spear to not only finish off the nearest zombies, but the wind blades generated by the fierce circular swing helped in the process to decimate several more of them. Around 280 soul record messages indicating the acquisition of enemy soul power. Xietain muttered as he observed with indifferent eyes, as more zombies replaced the ones he had just killed. In short, about 280 zombies in about 2 seconds. Xietain analyzed as he lunged to his right and stabbed fiercely with his spear forward. Boom! An air cannon powered by Xietain's powerful strength stat and the power of the golden spear directly annihilated a dozen zombies, turning their bodies into a pile of meat paste. The golden spear became a shimmering whirlwind under the sun's rays, as Xietain swung it delicately and skillfully from side to side. Every single swing took the lives of at least a few dozen, and sometimes more than 100 zombies exploded in a mist of blood. Simply by relying on physical attacks and taking into account the basic formula, in theory I should be able to annihilate 20 million zombies in about half a day, but it's impossible for me to kill that many zombies at once, unless I use all my strength, which at this time is best avoided, so that the bridge doesn't collapse. Xietain continued analyzing his current situation and possible future situation as he kept on slaughtering the enemies that did not stop coming. However, even if it were possible, fighting for half a whole day without having even a brief moment to rest might be a bit exhausting even for me. Not to mention the fact that I can sense several more powerful auras at the bottom of the bridge, which means these zombies are nothing more than snacks or disposable soldiers. Of course, I still need to use blood manipulation. Xietain kicked a zombie in front of him viciously, exploding the body of the creature. Without even letting the zombies in front of him step forward, Xietain slashed with his spear, swinging it in a wide golden arc that covered 3 meters in front of him, and thus eliminating more than 24 zombies. The zombies on the left and right quickly managed to close the gap left behind by their previous comrades, while those who had no room took advantage of the fact that Xietain had moved forward to cover the retreat completely. A zombie stretched its arms covered in blackish veins and slightly grayish skin forward, as its mouth emitted bestial growls. However, just as the zombie was about to touch Xietain's neck, it suddenly found that a crimson spear had pierced its brain, along with the brains of 3 other zombies in a straight line. Blood bullets. Xietain barked loudly before dashing forward like a whirlwind. Swoosh, 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 swoosh. The golden spear with 1,000 points of physical attack damage in the hands of Xietain turned into the Reaper's scythe. Each swing claimed the lives of several zombies, and in the process rotting blood began to fly everywhere. However, all this blood joined the blood that had already been spilled before, and under Xietain's magical power, it flew into the sky to quickly form around 100 blood bullets. The 100 blood bullets quickly became the followers of the Reaper, as they chased after Xietain under his careful control. 100 zombies fell for every passing second. With 100 blood bullets, Xietain could divide his attention with relative ease, so that 100 bullets became something similar to guided missiles, but in a sense better because instead of stopping after hitting their target, the blood bullets continued moving on to the next one, with the same ferocity as before. If it were his past self, it would be impossible to do this. However, since Xietain faced the Asura race and his blood manipulation skill raised 2 levels, the amount of information and control he gained over the skill was incomparable to the past. Therefore, even though the description of the skill itself had not changed at all after leveling up twice, the real power of Xietain had undoubtedly increased. In just 10 minutes of time, Xietain had directly slaughtered about 8,000 zombies. While 8,000 was an insignificant number compared to 20 million, the fact that those 8,000 zombies had fallen in just 10 minutes was the point of the matter. This meant that at this rate Xietain was eliminating around 800 zombies per minute. However, even though this was an impressive result, Xietain frowned tightly as he slaughtered from left to right and front to back without ever backing down. 800 zombies a minute, in other words, to wipe out the lives of 20 million zombies, I would need about 25,000 minutes, which would also be over 400 hours. Xietain stopped dead in his tracks, and after leaping slightly and performing a 360-degree turn several times to annihilate all the zombies nearby, he focused the 100 blood bullets to slaughter every zombie that tried to get close to him. While he was temporarily focusing on defense, Xietain frowned deeply as he thought deeply to himself, I can't go on like this. Even at this speed, it would take me more than 2 weeks to completely eliminate all these zombies, and that's without even considering the fact that first-order zombies appear in large numbers or second-order zombies. Otherwise, that time could easily grow several more days depending on the number of evolved enemies. 2 weeks to clear the entirety of this long bridge that separated Yanqing District from Changping District. 2 weeks to wipe out 20 million zombies single-handedly. Such was a result that 2 or 3 days ago Xietain would have accepted with a pleasant smile on his face. However, the current circumstances did not allow him to delay so long for such a thing. With the Earth constantly showing signs of evolution, and with the zombies becoming more and more powerful with each passing second, Xietain feared that his loved ones might not really be able to handle it during the second evolutive stage. Therefore, he had no choice but to hurry, and thus could not afford to lose half a month here. If Xietain lost half a month's time to clean the Eastern Dragon's back and added to the time he would need to find his loved ones in some human base or settlement, by that time, Earth would definitely have already started or might even have finished the second evolutive stage. I guess I'll have to try that. A strange glint shone in the eyes of Xietain, and silently the second activation of the passive skill God of War's will, called God of War's partial possession, began to affect his personality again, while the title Brilliant Mind repressed the effects that could be considered as dangerous to the current him. Lightning movement? Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Along with the fierce and characteristic lightning crackle, blue electric snakes began to flash around the body of Xietain intermittently. However, he did not stop and instead used the second activation of the skill lightning movement to spawn 3 clones of himself. The clones had no expressions on their faces, and except for the lifeless eyes, there was no difference between them and the actual Xietain. It would be extremely difficult for anyone to immediately notice which one was the real one. Xietain didn't care about the fact that he would now be losing 1 stamina point per second for each clone, and waved his free hand as he coldly said, "Go." Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. The 3 clones who possessed 10% of Xietan's overall strength dashed forward as his words left his mouth and immediately began slaughtering zombies with their bare fists. After all, these clones were made of 100% mana, so they did not fear zombie infection. Furthermore, 10% of Xietan's total strength was comparable to a first-order beast of approximately level 30 to 35. In short, he had just casually created 3 first-order beings to fight for his cause. However, the consumption was not low at all. In just 1 second in exchange for summoning 3 such powerful clones, Xietain lost 3 stamina points. In fact, for every second that passed, his stamina stat decreased by 3 points on the fly. Still, the expression of Xietain remained unperturbed as a slight glint of disdain flashed in his black eyes. Swoosh! Xietain lunged forward and like a ghost blinked through the zombies as he swung his spear masterfully. Behind him was a clone, to his left was another clone, and to his right, the last clone slaughtered the zombies with its bare fists. In addition, Xietain controlled the 100 blood bullets in such a way that when one of the clones was in danger of being destroyed after being overwhelmed by the numbers, he immediately turned that zombie into a sieve riddled with bloody holes. 5 seconds later, Xietain called up his status window and looked at his current stamina stat. Stamina: 1201, 1216, plus 35. Regeneration. Xietain whispered under his breath as he crushed a zombie's head with a punch. His eyes were ice-cold, similar to those of a killing machine, as he muttered in a flat voice resembling that of an emotionless robot. Overlap regeneration. Convert 100 mana points into 100 stamina points. Flash. A faint glow of golden light immediately surrounded the outline of Xietan's body, as the third-order regeneration rune etched deep into his soul became partially illuminated. The second activation, overlap regeneration, came into play in the act. Xietain immediately felt his available mana decrease by 50 points, and in return, he felt more refreshed. Then, he quickly looked at his current stamina stat again. Stamina: 1266, 1316, plus 35. Indeed, after spending 50 stamina points for the activation of overlap regeneration, Xietain had gained 50 stamina points more compared to his total peak, which meant that he had actually not only increased his maximum stamina, but also surpassed his previous peak by 10 points, for a total of 5 seconds. However, this was where the real test began, as this would be the first time Xietain would experiment using this skill. The 5 seconds were over very quickly, and just before another second passed and his clones consumed 3 stamina points, Xietain hurriedly rechecked his stamina. Stamina: 1216, plus 35. A smile immediately formed on his face as he saw that, just as he guessed, his stamina returned to its maximum when the skill overlap regeneration was activated. Then, he decided to test his next idea, which, if successful, would allow him to keep his 3 clones whose strength was comparable to that of first-order beings on the battlefield to help him in clearing zombies faster. Overlap regeneration: convert 200 stamina points into 200 mana points. Xietain whispered as he easily decapitated a first-order zombie that tried to sneak up behind him after mingling with other zombies with his spear after a swift swing. Flash. The golden light returned at the same time as a slight wave of exhaustion hit Xietan's body. Even so, his steps did not falter at all, and his movements with the spear did not slow down in the slightest.